Thursday's debate could be huge. It could be great for Biden, but it could also be huge for Trump. We'll talk about what's at stake and what you should look for that you can use to convince your conservative friends to come around this November. Also, looking at new polling, is Biden winning now, or is it impossible to tell? There were some elections last night. We'll talk about those too. Finally, there's an attack on voting rights in the swing state of New Hampshire underway, and we're bringing on a friend to tell us how we can help. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason, we're here. We are in the middle of the campaign season. There is a debate on Thursday. This is absolutely wild, which is tomorrow as of this recording. And it just feels too real right now. It feels like it snuck up on us a little bit. Let's kind of take this one step at a time and talk about both how each candidate is preparing or not, but also what we would do if we were them. Let's start with Biden because he's actually preparing. So it's probably a good place to start. He's been in Camp David, holed up with advisors for a few days. And this is a very traditional debate prep. So Ron Klain has run debate prep going all the way back, I think, to John Kerry. He ran it for Obama. He ran it for Hillary. He ran it for Biden last time. He was the chief of staff at the White House. This is a very traditional process, right? A briefing book with details and then top lines and key moments that you want to have. There's probably a list of like 10 lines that they want to make sure that they get out in the middle of this. And they're probably watching a lot of video of the last debates, both of Biden and things he did well or not, and things that Trump did. And Klain has, famously said multiple times that Trump only says 10 things. And he doesn't even mean just the debates. He says, like, in general, Trump has like sort of lines that he repeats everywhere. And my sense is they're anticipating those lines. They're practicing how Biden's going to respond to them. This is probably the safe strategy. Just go the way it's always been, If you're in that room, what are you telling Biden?
A couple of things. One, I think it's important to remember that political debate is, and look, if you say this to Biden, he's probably going to find it very condescending because he's been in politics a very long time, but that political debate is so different than debate inside a courtroom, debate, even like talking head debate on television, because you go into it with certain goals. And everything you do is about achieving those goals, meaning winning a given argument is often secondary. And so as a result, like there's a lot of discipline that goes into when your opponent says something that you have a response for factually, and that what they said is untrue. And let's be clear. He's about to debate someone who most of what they're going to say is going to be untrue. So having the discipline to know when to challenge that and when not to, and to know when you're being overwhelmed with BS and therefore you cannot sift through all of it. You'll waste all your time being on offense if you're constantly trying to fact check the other person. And so you have to establish from the beginning, what is our goal here? What is like our set of goals, maybe 3 goals that we want the American people to come away from this debate with? And then how do we make it so that every response we give, every answer, every attack that we go on gets us closer to that goal?
Yeah. And I was listening to Axe and Murphy this morning, and Pluff was on, and they were talking about in 2012, Obama famously had a horrible debate performance in his first debate against Romney. And they were saying there's certain traps that the incumbent president falls into. Number one is they're just so used to holding the floor and getting into a ton of details with their advisors or whoever they're talking to. And they've been president for 4 years or 3 years. And they just have a certain expectation about how they interact with people. I had forgotten how bad that debate with Obama was. The second thing, and I think this dovetails with your point of view, I think a week or two ago, is they said you cannot defend your record, which I thought was such an interesting point. So kind of contradicting what I was saying, but it makes sense. He's like, Axe was saying, like, look, these guys just want to talk about how great they've been as president. And that can't be what you do. You have to point the way forward, and you have to just have a story to tell. And they talked about how Obama pivoted from the first debate to the second debate, where In the second debate, he finally just he was, even after that debate, he was having really rough debate practices. And then he finally went away on his own and one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper wrote out 10 different things that he just wanted to get across in the debate. And then from that day forward, he carried that piece of paper everywhere he went up until the very moment he walked on stage. And that was how he kind of pulled it together, which I find really fascinating.
That makes perfect sense to me, because I think about, like, when I'm going to give a speech that is a topic that I'm not as familiar with, or at least maybe a topic I'm very familiar with, but a topic that I haven't, like a speech I haven't given very often. And oftentimes there's this process, right, where it's like, at first I'll write down, it'll take so many sheets of paper, and then maybe I'll even write it out word for word at some point. And then what often happens for me is, right before I'm actually going to give the speech, I might be a little nervous. Like, am I going to remember all this? Am I going to be able to stay on the script that I've written? And anybody who's seen me speak knows that, like, I pretty much never do anything word for word. It always somewhat extemporaneous. And what I end up doing is I end up sitting down and writing down literally like 7 words on a piece of paper. And then once I've done that process, oftentimes I never even look at the paper during the speech, because now I've distilled what it is I have to say into something so specific, and that process gets me there. And when I think back to the debate prep that I did, the only race I had where we really did the kind of debate prep, on the level of what Biden is doing now, was when I ran for the Senate. And I've talked about this maybe a few episodes ago, so I won't rehash it. But what I remember about it was, we did what Clayton is talking about. We practiced certain moments. We did all these things. And then once I got on the stage, I realized, oh, what I really have to do is very actively listen to what my opponent is saying, not for the purpose of defending myself or picking apart what they say, but almost like a drop-down menu, figuring out, of the things that I want to say. I always think about it like RoboCop. Like, if you remember the RoboCop movies, where RoboCop, you would often see it through RoboCop's viewfinder, their eyes, and there'd be like a drop-down menu that would come up and then identify the person they were with or what the threat was. And I think of it that way. Like, I have a drop-down menu that comes down in my vision, and as my opponent is speaking, I'm sifting through which of the things I was planning to say, or which of the topics I was planning to bring up, am I going to go to, and then I just, by being an active listener, modify it to what they said. And I think that's probably the most important thing in a presidential debate, because we have gotten really conditioned to the idea that debate prep is a thing, and that these candidates come in with a plan where they want to create a moment. And the truth is, politicians generally look pretty awkward when they are clearly saying something that they had practiced so that it would come across as spontaneous. And so you have to figure out, how do I say the thing I was planning to say, but in a way that demonstrates that it is in a direct response to what was just said, as opposed to just going with the line that we had practiced, which is going to look rehearsed and not authentic at all.
Yeah, you remind me, when I was in college, I had physics, and the professor said, okay, for the final exam, you could have an index card, and you could put whatever you want on this index card. And I remember I created, I used a printer to create the smallest possible font to have all the formulas and all that. But something happened in the process of continually iterating on my index card, because I kept coming up with new and interesting ways to make it small. I had memorized all the equations anyway, which I guess was his point, and I'm sure something will happen with Biden where he's, it gets complicated. There's all sorts of stuff he wants to say. Being Clayton, who was in that room during all the ups and downs of 2012, and certainly was helped preparing last time with Trump, is going to understand these traps. But I think the interesting piece here is, well, is the Trump who shows up going to be a predictable Trump? And number one, Trump is not preparing. I don't think we have to really go into the details here, but it's very clear from everything we know about him and what his advisors have been saying, is that he's really not going through a rigorous prep. But I don't think that means he's going to do poorly by the standards of his goal, right? His goal in this debate should be to show up and not do any harm to the trajectory he has right now, and seem like a halfway normal human being, right? Which is a tall order for Trump, but not a tall order, right? So you think about, well, what would a win for Trump look like? It would be, first of all, he's helped immensely by the fact that they cut off the mics. So all the crazy stuff that he was doing before wouldn't work unless he really like is visibly trying to shout over the cutoff mic, and somehow that's obvious. But what I think his advisors are telling him, and that I think in theory he's going to agree with, is be subdued, repeat a couple things. Inflation's out of control, borders out of control, Hunter, like throw a couple of Hunter things in there, yada, yada, yada. Talk about, what we're going to hear the most by far in this debate from Trump. We're going to probably hear it 20 times, is the economy was doing better under me than it is under you. If he just calms himself down, repeats those lines, he himself, we always talk about the low expectations for Biden. The expectations are also kind of low for Trump in the sense that people are expecting him to be a lunatic like he was last time. So if he shows up halfway normal, he can defy the expectations too. My prediction is he starts that way, but that over the course of this 90 minutes, he forgets that was his strategy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, what he will want to do is, as like what do they get? They get 90 seconds at a time or whatever. In 90 seconds, you can fill the system with a lot of BS. Yes. And so we have to recognize that he's gonna say what he's been told to say, like, look, the economy was better under me, just exactly what you're saying. But then he's also gonna say stuff like, crime is the worst it's ever been. It's completely unsafe. You've completely opened the border. We don't really have a border anymore. All this stuff, and then filler words that he uses all the time, like, we've never seen anything like it. That kind of thing. I mean, it's the worst it's ever been, and all that kind of thing. And so we know that's going to happen, and that part will happen from the very beginning. But you're right. I think he will start out with a temperament that is not very Trump-like, and I agree that it will taper off. I think what's interesting is that Biden has actually improved, I think, over the last few years at something that you would not expect somebody in that role or of his age to improve at, which is he has gotten, I think, tremendously better at staying out of the weeds on stuff. Because I remember back in 2016 and even in the early part of the 2020 campaign, Biden did that I've been in Washington forever thing, where he wanted to dazzle you with the incredible details he had about policy, which the command of policy that he has compared to Trump is they're not in the same class even remotely. But he also did this thing that is really common to longtime politicians at every level. And that is that longtime politicians have developed over the course of their career a series of riffs that they do. And we know what Biden's riffs are, right? Like the greatest hits are pretty easy to name, right? It's like my nickname was Middle Class Joe and it wasn't meant as a compliment, all that kind of stuff. We've heard all that. But the thing is that he also has riffs like that on every possible policy area. And what happens to politicians, I think about like governors and folks like that, is that toward the end of their time in an office, each riff seems to remind them of another riff and tie into it. And so they have trouble stopping. They have trouble coming to a point where they can land the plane. And remarkably, in the Oval Office, I feel like Biden has vastly improved at that. Biden is now in a place where if you put him on the stump, he tells you the top lines in a way that the average American can understand. And then he doesn't get that deep into the details. He doesn't go and tell you about how this 0.25% tax credit would actually operate. He just tells you that he wants to make it where everybody can go to community college. That's not how he used to do it. But Trump, meanwhile, does these rallies, which they say is his preparation for the debate, where he goes out and he just goes on these big stem winders of speeches where one thing leads to another and it's stream of conscious. I actually think that could become a huge problem for Trump in the debate because he won't know where to land the plane and make a point. And Biden is much better at that now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. You think about, first of all, the stakes are very high in this debate because it's one of only a few collective moments that we're going to have in this entire campaign, and it's going to frame the entire summer. So if Biden has a terrible night, it is going to completely color the conversation heading into the convention, and it's going to lead to a lot of pressure for something to happen at that convention. If he has a great night, then I'm curious. Like, a couple predictions here. One is I think this is going to be the only debate under almost any circumstance, unless it's a tie. If it's a tie, I think we have another debate. But I think if it's obvious one side, one or the other, that side has every incentive not to debate again. And I think that the sort of politics that we have will allow for that. I think the other piece here is, I don't know if you've been watching any of the soccer lately over in Europe or the Copa America here. In soccer with these group stages, there's this interesting phenomenon where you get to the third match, and often one team has an incentive to just tie, like to have a 0-0 as a win, or obviously they want to win, but a tie is a lot easier to do than a win, and you could just waste time, right? Just filibuster, don't do anything crazy. I think that there's a lot of scenarios where if there was a rational Trump, that's what he's trying to do in this debate. Is like he's just trying to not do any damage because his team perceives him as being in the driver's seat right now. We'll talk in the next segment about whether that's actually true, but I think that's what they think. And if that's what you think, and your liability, because Biden's liability is that he doesn't want to walk into the Sleepy Joe thing. So actually trying to filibuster would cause him problems. But if you're Trump and your liability is that people think you're a little wild and crazy and all that, then you being subdued actually is not very risky at all. So rational Trump, which is not a Trump that exists on this planet, has a lot to work with in this debate. Now, I've never met rational Trump, but it's just something we should consider.
There's also a real inverse relationship to the debates that both candidates have, which is that Trump's poll numbers clearly do better when a wide audience sees him less often. Because what happens is that the memory of an unhinged version of Trump fades naturally because the national attention span is just not what it once was. And on top of that, people don't really find out that he is much more unhinged than he was even when he left office. And so the more that it can be the idea of Trump that is running for president, the better that is for Trump. Meanwhile, with Biden, I think it's different. I think the State of the Union is a great example of this, that the Trump campaign, and frankly, the media who doesn't know what else to say about Biden and is desperate to try and both sides everything, ends up portraying Biden as doddering and not really with his hand firmly on the wheel. And so every time the American public really sees him in full, so far, knock on wood, he has been very successful at demonstrating, no, I still got this. Like I'm still, Joe Biden, and I still am in control and doing things well. And so it's interesting. I think they have an inverse relationship to sort of the incentive structure for the debates, because I think it's helpful to the Biden campaign when more people see Trump in an unedited way. And I think it's helpful to Biden when more people see Biden in an unedited way, as evidenced by the fact that we are constantly seeing heavily edited versions of Biden put out by the Trump campaign. And so I agree with you that it is likely that you don't get a second debate from Trump. I think it'd be Trump who decides not to do it. And most likely, I think if you're president of the United States and you are not way ahead and you've decided that debating is bad for you, if you're the incumbent president, then that's just a really bad sign. So if Biden ends up in that place, then we're in real trouble. But I think the other factor here is that you've got Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, who, of course, Trump will pre-debate and post-debate, no matter what happens, portray as being terribly unfair to him. But what their incentives are is to demonstrate that they can do a good job at holding both candidates accountable. And obviously that lift is heavier with Trump. And so that's why I think that there's a real possibility that you have, like when Trump says something that is completely untrue, like when he says, the election was stolen or whatever, I'm not sure that it's going to be Biden's responsibility to refute that. I think Jake may jump in and just say, before we go to your answer, Mr. President, we want to point out that that is not true. I think that may happen, and that may be too much for Trump. He may not be able to handle that.
Yeah, it's these debates are I mean, I don't think I ever drink as much than I do on these debate nights, in part because everything is so fraught. Like even what you just described, I've already heard Trump pre-cooking it by saying he's debating 3 people and all this, and
Right.
the lift for him is just so light. And so this is what worries me heading into this, if I'm being honest, is like the lift is so light. First of all, he could do what I just said. And honestly, if what we get is a subdued back and forth where actually both people look clear, it's good for Trump because it normalizes a person who's
Mhm.
not normal, right? So that he wins that, right? If he's just subdued and Biden is sucks, that's great for Trump. He wins. Uh, if he's aggressive and doing all that, at least his mic is being cut off. He couldn't look worse than that first time when he was literally spewing COVID at Biden and like,
Yeah.
shouting over and just acting crazy. And then having Tapper correct him, they'll then spin that off as an edit to his 7 million TikTok viewers as him having to debate the media establishment, which, we know a lot of people are not going to watch this debate. They're only going to see the clips. And a lot of people out of context will see a couple clips of the CNN people correcting um, Trump, and then he'll mission accomplished. He'll raise a ton more money off of that and move on. So there is a bit of a needle to thread here.
The other wild card I think that exists here is if you can surprise your opponent with something they weren't expecting mid debate and that they're not prepared for, it's obviously an advantage. And the advantage that Trump has is that his following is such that he could completely change his position on something in this debate. And there is a huge portion of his debate of his base that will just be like, that's our position now. Like, I'm exaggerating, but I'm not overly like crazy exaggerating when I say that Trump could come out in this debate and just decide to reframe his position on abortion as pro-choice. Like that could happen.
He could announce his VP. Like if Trump is crazy enough that if he feels like it's not going well, he would just announce his vice presidential pick in the middle of the debate.
And then that's the news from the debate, no
Yeah.
matter what else happened.
So I guess my point is, and it seems like he just has a lot of cards now. So I don't want to underestimate him and what he's working with here. So it is going to be a difficult night, and a lot is going to have to go right for us. And honestly, a lot has to go right for us. This is a really important moment.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Here's the lesson I think that people listening to this can take from Joe Biden going into this debate that they can use like in their relationships where they try to persuade people, which is that know what you can and cannot control and know what your goals are. Biden cannot control if Trump comes out and does some crazy wild card thing. He can't control that. He cannot control how Trump approaches the debate, whether he chooses to try and portray himself as a fully sane individual and play that character, or whether he just goes so wild card crazy that he just literally shouts over Biden regardless of what's going on with the mics. We can't control any of that. What Biden can control is, here are the things I want to accomplish. Here are the points I want to get across. And here is how I want to come across. And I think that's really important to remember when you're with someone who you're trying to persuade, or you're arguing with someone who you'll never persuade, but there's someone you want to persuade who's part of the conversation. Remember what your goals are and don't try and outright win everything. If you try and outright win everything, you'll win nothing. So you have to know exactly what it is you want out of it and understand that there could be something outlandish that the other person says that tries to sidebar the whole thing. You can't control that.
What's interesting to me is Biden. I'm trying to think of what the equivalents are for Biden, where he can kind of, knock Trump off of his game with something unexpected, right? It's tricky because he's president, but what can he do, right? He's not gonna like announce a new vice presidential pick, right? So that's off the table. I think it's certain moves, and this is what worries me a little bit about Klain, is he's very traditional, but we're not living in a traditional environment anymore, is to do things that would surprise Trump and position Trump in the minds of the audience in a certain way and kind of break the fourth wall. An example would be a really important moment is going to be when Trump makes all these claims about the border, and Biden has to make the case that he pushed a bill that was like negotiated with the most conservative senator in the U.S. Senate and endorsed by the Border Patrol's union, and Trump tanked it, right? That's the traditional answer, right? And we can expect that answer. Now, what's a riskier but perhaps important moment you can create out of it? Well, what if he said, look, he said all those things, Biden, and then he ends his answer by saying, look, I'm exasperated here because I'm doing all the things that you claim you want. I commit right now on this debate stage. You tell me what is you need in this bill. Let's get it passed together. And let's see what Trump says. Be like, look, we both agree it's a problem. I created a bill that seems like it's the bill you'd want. You explicitly said you didn't want it for political reasons. Let's commit to the American public right now. You tell me right now what you want. I'll do it. I will build, I've told you this before. I would be like, look, if you want to build the wall, I'll be your bricklayer. Whatever it is you want, just to show that Trump is full of it on this, right? Now, I know a lot of people would freak out about this, but this is if you want to start throwing some fastballs. These are the kinds of things.
No, I think you could do that. I think you could present Trump with a challenge about like a piece of information that he does. Like, what I would do is I would make an argument that is a Trump argument and then get Trump to argue back against it, and him not realizing that he's made it, and then just say, okay, that's funny because what I just said, it was word for word what was in your policy, and you're just against anything I'm for. Like I would pull a trick like that on him,
right?
For two reasons. One, it demonstrates the unseriousness of Trump, but it also is a pretty big flex on mental acuity. If you can do something like that. I also, if Trump brings up health, if I'm Biden, I might be like, let's have a push-up contest right now. Like,
no, I don't think those things look good. I think the American people hate that kind of stuff.
Well, maybe so, but my point is like, if he's all over it, just something that shows I'm not afraid of that argument. I'm not afraid of that challenge.
Or maybe that wouldn't be bad. Yeah, I mean, he would win that for sure. Like,
yeah, for sure.
What I know about Joe Biden,
I think the only physical contest he can't beat Trump at is golf, and that's just a lack of practice.
Trump cheats a lot at golf. I don't know what Biden.
I'm sure that's right.
He plays.
I don't think Biden's a golfer.
So it'll be interesting to watch. The other thing is that this is a 90-minute debate, and in past years, traditionally what happens is the first 10 to 15 minutes are all that really matter, unless there's a significant gaffe somewhere along the lines, right? You can lose the debate at any point in the debate, but you can only win it in the first 10 to 15 minutes, right? I think things have changed where now it's going to be the battle of the clips and all this kind of stuff. So many people will only consume this through media, which is something we'll talk about in a little bit. Well, why don't we take a break, and when we come back, there's actually some pretty promising polling data for Joe Biden, and then some rough financial numbers coming in for us. We'll talk about that, and then we'll, if we have time, we'll talk about some digital trends that are really fascinating about how people are interacting with this race. All of this when we come back. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored advice to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism and whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. And then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You could also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep on top of your health game. This is really important. I've been running this fitness community for years, and often what I hear from people is, my metabolism is X, my metabolism is Y. But this actually gives you the data to actually confirm or in some ways challenge some assumptions you have about your body. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness levels, better sleep, and it could track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so you can keep up your energy and stave off cravings. So If you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/majority to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/majority for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
Here's the deal, folks. Sleep is so important in my household, which is why I'm in love with my Helix mattress. With everything going on in life, from work to a demanding social schedule, which is to say my kids have a social schedule and that puts me in demand, to my kids' sports, to me playing sports, to my wife playing sports. It's incredibly important to me and to all of us that we're getting a good night's sleep every single night. My wife can attest. We've had our Helix mattress for over 2 years now, and our sleep quality has improved tremendously. The Helix lineup offers 20 unique mattresses, including the award-winning Luxe collection, the newly released Helix Elite collection, about which I am very curious, a mattress designed for big and tall sleepers, and even a mattress made just for kids. So how will you know which Helix mattress works best for you and your body? You take the Helix Sleep Quiz and you find your perfect mattress in under 2 minutes. And your personalized mattress is then shipped straight to your door free of charge. I took the Helix Sleep Quiz and I was matched with the Midnight Luxe mattress because I wanted something that was firm, and I'm a side sleeper. My mattress is a complete upgrade from our previous mattress. And the thing is, I toss and turn all night, and that used to really keep my wife up. But now she can just sleep right through it because she doesn't feel it on her side of the bed, which is amazing. Helix knows that there's no better way to test out a new mattress than by sleeping on it in your own home. And that's why they offer a 100-night trial and a 10 to 15-year warranty to try out your new Helix mattress. Helix has also been awarded the #1 mattress pick by GQ and Wired Magazine. It's even recommended by multiple leading chiropractors and doctors of sleep medicine as a go-to solution for improving your sleep. Helix is offering up to 30% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/majority. That's helixsleep.com/majority. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now.
All right, Jason. Well, 538 for the first time, I think in like a year or two, their model has Biden slightly ahead in their sort of roll-up model, who's favored to run the election. So this is 51-49. At the same time, their polling average also has Biden leading by like 0.1 or something like that. On the flip side, New York Times has their own model that they just introduced and has Biden losing in every single swing state, including in certain cases well outside of the margin of error and any conceivable polling miss. So I have no idea what's going on. I obviously would love to believe 538 is onto something here. I know what you're going to say, but do you make anything of any of this?
What do you think I'm going to say?
That it doesn't matter. But
well, yeah, sort of. But I'm going to say it doesn't matter because I don't think anybody knows what's going on, including the pollsters. I mean, let's do, for the edification of the audience, let's do a quick primer on how polling actually works. Because I think what most people think is that polling is simply you call a group of people and you see, who's voting how, and that's what a poll is. And that would seem to be a very unweighted, unbiased way to do it. Maybe at some point in polling, that's how it was done. But for my entire time in politics, polling is actually much more, I don't want to say scientific, but much more predictive in terms of what you put into the model is what you're going to get out. So whenever we would do polling in my races, you would look at the results, but you would also look at crosstabs, which were like how certain groups within certain little demographics were voting. But then when you would do it, or were responding in the poll, but then when you would do that, you would notice things like, oh, this poll assumes that such and such percentage of the people voting in this election will be Democrats, and such percentage will be Republicans, and so forth with independents or third party members. And as soon as you've done that, it's called weighting. As soon as you have weighted the poll, you've already baked in some sort of answer, or at least constrained what the possible results can be with some left and right limits. And so that to me is the real problem with not 538, but just with the entire concept of aggregating polls, right? Now, I know I think that 538 goes out of their way to unweight certain things, and then, But when you're doing that, you're trying to put in a barrel a whole bunch of different polls that have different guesses as to what turnout's going to look like among not just the parties, but age groups, demographics. And I just think in a country where a million things have changed that make polling harder, but the chief thing that's changed is we don't all have a landline phone. In fact, nobody does. And so knowing exactly who you're talking to, and knowing whether or not the answers they're giving you are real, are right, mean to me that polling is much less interesting to me than is focus groups. Focus groups are very interesting to me because focus groups are where you get people's actual emotional reaction to things, where you get to measure their intensity of feeling, right? Like you can, a perfect example is when, this question that we've had for a long time that is now somewhat moot, which is, if Donald Trump is convicted of a felony, does it make you more or less likely to vote for him? Whenever you ask that question, most polls had a majority of voters saying it would make them less likely to vote for him. But what you can't measure in a poll that you can at least get quality information about in a focus group is how intensely do they feel that way, right? Less likely to vote for them, sure, but by a lot or by a negligible amount. So I'm really over polling, to be honest. I know we were going to talk about this for a few minutes, and I just kind of stepped on it with that.
No,
But
I mean, there's really not much there, and obviously, it's kind of a lay of the land before we head into this debate where things could change. The other piece here is, I suspect what's going on with 538 is there's some wonky stuff happening with traditional demographic groups. There's not a lot of stability heading into this race. Like Biden is overperforming the older voters. He'll probably perform better with older white voters than any Democrat in recent memory, but also perform worse with black voters, according to the data that we've seen. That's probably messing with the model a ton. The Fox News poll that Trump hated so much, that had, I think, Biden up 1 or something recently, or tied, had Biden winning rural voters, which I wish were true. I just can't imagine possible. I really hope that's true.
Rural Vermont, maybe.
Yeah. So it's just, it's tricky.
Maybe.
Now, one piece of data that is not great is the fundraising numbers. So a couple months ago, Biden had $100 million cash advantage over Trump. We did a segment on it, talking about how much that would, basically gave him a war chest to fight the kind of battle that he needed to. Now, with 2 very successful fundraising months from Trump, Trump is actually ahead. I think it's $235 million to $215 million or something like that. Trump and his sort of Trump associated PACs are now have more cash than the Biden team has. This is because of a couple of things. One was the verdicts. Trump raised a ton of money off of that, but also like some of these big billionaires are stepping up for Trump, because I think the perception is that Trump is more likely than not to be the next president of the United States, and so people who are very self-interested are stepping in and trying to curry favor. There was a $50 million check, I believe, from the Mellons. David Sachs, one of Elon's sort of right-hand guys, did a big Silicon Valley fundraiser for Trump. There's a lot of Silicon Valley money, it seems, moving towards Trump. And so he's going to have money to run a robust campaign here. And I think that's another sobering fact that we need to deal with.
He is, but there is a difference here. When you have a huge, and because we learned this with DeSantis, when you have huge amounts of money flowing in a completely sort of that unregulated, unlimited money that's going into the IEs, and you're thinking that you're going to use that as your voter turnout mechanism, that is treacherous, as opposed to having it in a more centralized system where, like the DNC, like the Biden campaign, and having the bulk of your cash there, I think is still advantageous to something where it's like a group of people doing things on your behalf. I do think that is still a risky proposition that Trump is taking, and he's having to do it because he's raising money in these huge chunks at a time from individuals. And when you're doing that, you can't take it directly into the campaign that you control.
Well, one thing that troubled me today is I'm reading about how this PAC is spending a ton of money to get Trump voters to gear up to vote early, which is not what you want to hear. Because that
they
was
finally figured that out this time.
Yeah, they made a mistake last time on this front, and they're not going to repeat it. I think if I were in their camp right? Like, obviously I would never, but if I were there, that would be like number one on my list, and they're doing that. So they're not, I think, like, you've probably heard this coach speak before. Never underestimate your opponents. I think in this case, we like to view the Trump team as this Keystone Cops group of people who are going to screw things up. And, maybe that's true, but they're self-interested, and Trump himself has everything to lose in this race, including his freedom. And so far, we don't have a lot of evidence that they're going to hand us any easy wins here, which means that we're just going to have to be extremely disciplined and do everything right.
Yeah, we've got to remember that the only Keystone Cop involved in this is Trump. And the reason that was the case, a few years ago, is that all these people were new to this, right? They were all grifters and folks who had been, basically in the Trump orbit, doing things that were all about making lots of money in nefarious ways. And now they were like, now we're going to try politics. And they didn't really know what they were doing at first. But now they have figured it out. Now the Velociraptor can open doors, right? They've had time. And so it's a completely different situation now. And on top of that, a lot of the self-serving people in that orbit are people who do come from the technology world. And so I would say we should look at it completely differently. Like, we are the underdog here when it comes to that sort of organization. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Biden is overperforming with older voters. Trump is underperforming with younger voters. Meanwhile, Biden is doing extremely well on Facebook and Trump is doing extremely well on TikTok. It's not a coincidence. That's how that's happening.
Yeah. And what you're referring to, and we don't have time to go through it all, but there's this newsletter called FWIW, which like tracks weekly trends. And basically Team Biden and Democratic affiliated groups are spending way more on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. Trump's team is spending, and Republican affiliated groups are spending way more on X. And then on TikTok, it's not a question of spend, but trends. All 10 of the top trending posts about Trump that mention Trump by name are pro-Trump messages. And nearly all of the trending Biden posts are negative Biden on TikTok. And we could probably spend an hour or 20 talking about that, but I have lots of
questions.
There's
one simple reason for it as well, right? Which is that, let's be honest, like the enthusiasm factor is an issue, right? Like the enthusiasm for Trump has always been greater because it's based largely in anger and grievance. And that is oftentimes more motivating than is a message of hope and positivity. It's the old thing of a lie goes around the world so much faster than the truth. And so I don't remember how it goes. It's like before it can get out of bed, it's already all the way around the world. And so I think that's part of it as well. Now, if you want to draw some optimism out of that, it's that the older demographic is a much more reliably voting demographic when it comes to turnout. So and Biden is still, I think, most likely going to win young voters. It's just nowhere near the way he's done it in the past.
Well, on that sunny note, shall we introduce our guest?
Sure, absolutely. So let's bring in Lucas Meyer. Lucas is somebody who I actually first met back when I had an organization that people listening or watching may or may not remember called Let America Vote, which still exists today. And Let America Vote was created to create political consequences for voter suppression. And back in between 2016 2020, there was a lot of voter suppression attempts in the state of New Hampshire, and it was largely grown out of the fact that there had been a very close Senate race there and that Trump had lost the presidential there. And so they had made all sorts of claims about voter fraud that were untrue in New Hampshire. And when I met Lucas, he was head of the college Democrats there and really impressed me. Lucas remains super involved. He has run several successful campaigns and advocacy coalitions in New Hampshire, including Congressman Chris Popps' historic reelection in 2020, the New Hampshire Campaign for Voting Rights and Fair Maps. He served as the caucus director for the New Hampshire Senate Democratic Caucus. And as I mentioned, he was president of the Young Democrats for 5 years. I wanted to have Lucas on because he emailed me the other day to say, hey, there's a brand new attack on voting rights in New Hampshire that could conceivably also spread to other states. They've often used New Hampshire as a sort of a pilot project for what they could do in terms of trampling voting rights. And so I was like, well, why don't you just come on and tell us about it and then what we can do about it. So Lucas, tell us what's going on in New Hampshire.
Well, great to see both of you. And Jason, thank you again for all your work in the state over the years during that SB3 fight, which was that big voter suppression battle, which ended up, we won in Superior Court. We ended up winning in the Supreme Court. Your leadership really meant a big difference. And regrettably, we are stuck in that Groundhog Day of voter suppression in New Hampshire. What was it, that North Carolina Supreme Court decision? They said it was like surgical precision for voter suppression with gerrymandering. In New Hampshire, it's almost like blunt force trauma. They are not precise with it. It is a very blunt instrument. I think on the anniversary of the Dobbs decision, where we hear very often that we're going to send it back to the states. Well, let's look at those states. Let's look at what is happening in those states. And in New Hampshire, we live in a state with gerrymandered state legislative maps. And we live in a state with a conservative leadership that is hell-bent on restricting who is able to take part in our elections. And this new attempt, HB 1569, which has passed both chambers, is on its way to the governor's desk, gets rid of our citizen affidavit. So in New Hampshire, as a same-day voter registration state, you are allowed to show up same day and register to vote and cast your ballot. We do not have a lot of early vote options, or any for that matter. We have no online voter registration, no automatic voter registration, no real absentee ballot access. So our same day voter registration is really, really important to our right to vote. And right now, when you show up, you have to prove your age, citizen, domicile. I'm forgetting the fourth there. But Republican leadership got rid of all of those affidavits. So now, when you are registering to vote in New Hampshire, if you do not bring your passport, naturalization papers, or birth certificate, you get sent home. That has implications for all voters. Republican Senate election law chair has said this probably won't stand up in court. We've heard vague allusions from Governor Sununu that he does not support it. But this kind of gets to, we talk a lot about protecting democracy. We want to improve democracy, but this is draconian. This is really dangerous. So, where it's an all hands on deck moment in New Hampshire, a state where a lot of people forget in 2000, if Al Gore carries New Hampshire, Florida doesn't matter. You look at the results in 2016 between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, really, really narrow margins. Senator Hassan wins her race by 1,000 votes for Senate in 2016. New Hampshire is home to really close elections. So it's not terribly hard to see why Republicans might be introducing a really restrictive sweeping voter suppression bill just weeks before our primary happens. So a really, really do or die moment here for New Hampshire democracy.
Now, I think I know the answer to this because I think it's the same as it was before, but tell people, who is the group? Because New Hampshire is, for lack of a better way of putting it, a pretty white state. All right. And we're accustomed to voter suppression tactics are aimed at Americans of color. Who is the group who is primarily being targeted by a voter suppression tactic like this in New Hampshire?
I mean, this really gets to like that blunt force trauma. Like I think they're trying to go after first-time voters, new Americans, younger voters. But the reality of this is, and there was an NHPR report about this the other week. How many people carry their passport or their birth certificate or their naturalization papers with them? Nonetheless, in a state with same-day voter registration, where most people, that's how they're going to register to vote. So how many people are going to show up on election day and not have these things with them? I mean, it is almost beyond the pale. We have conversations with election officials. We talk a lot about the first in the nation state, right? A lot of people really pound their chest about how New Hampshire does democracy right. We rely on literally thousands of election workers and volunteers to do this job. And our state government is proposing overhauling this entire process just weeks out from the election. And I don't think it's a terribly controversial opinion here that the temperature is probably going to be pretty high on election day. Do we want long lines at our polling locations with people saying for the first time, what do you mean I need my passport, my birth certificate? Now, like, I have started to see Elon Musk tweeting about non-citizens voting in our elections. You always see these things in New Hampshire and you kind of wonder, like, where is this really coming from? And I think we're going to start to see more of this non-citizens voting in elections. And this makes me really, really nervous because we've heard Governor Sununu make indications that he's inclined to veto this, but hasn't said definitively. The governor also said he really liked Nikki Haley and said a lot of really mean things about Donald Trump. And now he's going to vote for Donald Trump. Like, this really, I cannot emphasize enough, like, the national implications. If this bill does pass and the impacts it could have on turnout in New Hampshire, it's not an exaggeration to say it could impact control of Congress. With our 2 very competitive congressional seats, we have an open governor's race, the only one in the country with a really, really competitive race. A state legislature that's divided by, a 400-person state house that's divided by 2 or 3 seats at the moment. 1,000 votes here or there disenfranchised could sway a lot of control of power. And again, we're living in a state with gerrymandered legislative maps. We have had Democrats win a majority of votes for each of the 3 legislative chambers and still do not control any of them. It is a real problem in the state. HB 1569 is going to make it a heck of a lot worse. And again, no assurances from the governor that he'll actually veto this just weeks from our elections.
Here's why I think people listening to this should be so concerned, in addition to the things that you laid out, Lucas, as to how the way New Hampshire goes can affect the rest of the country. It's also, if you can pass something like this and then have it withstand legal muster, then what you're doing is you're taking the group. I think that the group that they're primarily going after is students. There's a ton of colleges in New Hampshire. There's a lot of people who go there for college who did not grow up in New Hampshire and who are the least likely people to have either their birth certificate and their passport, to have those documents with them where they live and where they plan to vote. And that is students who are away from home, right? And you know, I remember back in 2016, it was very clear the Republicans felt like students were the difference in both the presidential and the Senate election in New Hampshire. And so they went after them and basically accused them of fraud. It was, by the way, a pretty weird situation, Ravi, because I was on the ground in New Hampshire as the former Missouri Secretary of State, yelling and screaming about how wrong it was. And Chris Kobach was there as the, at the time, current Kansas Secretary of State, talking about how great all of these new laws would be. And it was like this Missouri, and he and I at the time lived like 30 minutes apart in the Kansas City area, but we were just battling it out in New Hampshire in this like Vietnam style proxy war.
Down, just a very normal for you guys to be doing.
It was wild. It's also entirely possible that I was there because I wanted to run for president, but we don't need to get into that because I don't want to do that anymore. But the reason I bring this up is because you got to take this out to its logical conclusion. Let's say this passes in New Hampshire, that gets signed by Sununu, and let's say it stands up. Let's say you are from Arizona and you're going to school in New Hampshire. And let's say then Arizona passes a similar law. Well, now you're disenfranchised from voting in either place. If you cannot register to vote without certain documents, and if Arizona passes a version of the law that New Hampshire wanted to pass in the past, wanted to put in place in the past, which said that you had to demonstrate that you had lived there for a certain period of time, well, if you get that cocktail of laws in place, you've now fully disenfranchised college students because they cannot prove that they've lived in the place for a certain period of time, and they don't have the documents necessary to actually register same day in the place where they're living. So now you've completely disenfranchised a generation that does tend to vote Democratic, and that is why I think you're doing it at all.
Well, you know, like I co-founded 603 Forward, which is the leadership development hub in the state. We help recruit young leaders to run for office. But, you know, part of that work is finding those leaders in the community. And what we hear a lot from folks, and this is why I get uncomfortable when people say we're trying to protect democracy. Because I think most young people look at it and they're like, this isn't working for me, especially in New Hampshire. Like I can bank online, I can buy a car online. But if I want to update my voter registration or register to vote online, that is a bridge too far in New Hampshire. Your voice does not matter enough. There seems to be this level of dedication to our democracy in New Hampshire that seems super superficial, that it really doesn't get to the real infrastructure of our democracy. And how can, and you know, we talk about engaging young people in the process. I don't know how someone isn't disenfranchised or isn't turned off by the process in New Hampshire, where you have the highest, let's say you're a student, highest student loan debt in the country, lowest contribution of the state to our university system. And then the state is doing everything possible to say you can't vote. And we want these young people to be civically minded and engaged in their communities. How can you blame them? Like, the government isn't working for them. So I'm always preaching the gospel, and with our team at 603 Forward and all of our young leaders, that like, we're trying to modernize our democracy. We're trying to make our democracy work for you. Because right now, if you're a young person, you look around, you don't understand what the government can do for you. Even if you lived through the pandemic, it doesn't make sense. Why are corporations getting more money? Why are the rich getting richer? Why, when I go and vote for my representative, do I not then live in a representative democracy? I mean, there are some very basic ideals we're reaching for here that don't seem super controversial, but Republicans are really hell-bent in this state from doing anything that is proactive, anything that says, how do we bring more people into the process? I mean, my brother served in the Marine Corps and was deployed to Afghanistan. I talked to him a lot about this, about why he served. What does service mean to him? And I can't help but think, on election day, if this is law, how horrific it will be. An active duty member of our military could go to the polling location and get turned away because they don't have their passport. Like, what? Like, who is this to? Like, what problem are we trying to solve? There isn't one. We do not have universal participation in our elections. So why are we trying to put up these barriers, these ridiculous barriers, for no reason? My assumption, minoritarian rule. Those who do not have the right ideas, but who are in power, do not want to leave power. And I think, like, if that doesn't get you out of bed and fired up to go vote for Joe Biden or something, like, I don't know what will.
Lucas, how can people help you? Where can they go? What can they do?
Well, we are, for those folks like out and about across the country, we are doing patch through phone banks on Thursday nights in New Hampshire. So if you don't live here, you can call into some of these, really important communities to find Granite Staters to then call the governor and ask him to veto. We obviously, 603 Forward runs a very large voter education program, in addition to our independent expenditure work, making sure we get a bunch of these, over 100 young leaders on the ballot this fall into office. We also want to make sure everyone knows their right to vote. If this is the law, we are going to have to do so much voter education. I don't know if we can overcome these hurdles, but we're certainly going to try our damnedest. So 603 Forward, go online, go on our social, please. If you have a couple extra bucks to chip in, New Hampshire, a very small state, a little bit goes a long way here. And if you're eager to jump in to a patch through phone bank on Thursday nights, really could use the help. Matt Mushian, our advocacy and engagement director, will be thrilled to have the extra callers on Thursday nights.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucas. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you both. Really appreciate it.
All right, Ravi, one for us. What's going on?
What is going on? Well, I'm just back on the road a little bit. I'm over in DC for some meetings, then back to New York, and then to Boston for a memorial for the woman who taught me how to run schools. So she died a couple months ago. So I'm heading out there to just, it was one of those things where you knew it was coming. But what about you?
Well, I have been listening to Killing Justice like as soon as every episode drops of your podcast. I'm very excited for the next one, which I guess is going to be where we go on the journey to your dad's village with you and your dad. I'm pumped for that, and so it's been awesome. And then this past weekend, True played in the 10 and under state baseball tournament, and they got to the championship game, but lost the championship game. But this is a group of 10-year-olds that it's just ridiculous how good they are at baseball. It was cool. True, he got in some crucial moments, and he struck out a cleanup hitter with the bases loaded. And you don't get to face that kind of adversity as a 10-year-old usually, particularly if you're, coming up in a pretty privileged.
Does that mean the season's over now for him, or it just keeps going?
A funny thing is, it's like halfway through the season. It's like the summer.
I forget it's baseball.
Tournament.
Baseball's like 100. I was looking at the Yankees record the other day, and I was like, "This can't be. There has to be. They must have added a 0 by mistake to this. How is it possible there's been this many games?"
Dude, he's played nearly as many games as they have played tonight. They will play their 48th game of the summer. It is June. It's pretty incredible. So
wow, well, that's
anyway.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
All right. Well, thank you to Lucas. Thank you to everybody for listening. You can find Ravi and myself on social. I'm at Jason Kander. He's at Ravi M. Gupta. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.